Why is it when a project is big and complicated and challenging, it's super hard to finish, but when it's small and simple and not particularly challenging, it's super hard to finish? Like, no matter what you're working on, it's so hard to get things across the finish line. What's the deal? Let's talk about it. In the town where I live, they're building a brand new high school. And the other day, my daughter and I were driving by and we noticed that they've made a ton of progress from the outside. And my daughter looked at it and she's like, oh, wow, like they're almost done. And I thought, you sweet, sweet, innocent child. Yes, from the outside, it looks like they're basically finished, but they've probably got at least 6 more months of work, because once you get this far, you realize you've got a lot left to do. And I started thinking about how that's pretty much every project, whether it's construction or art or anything. When you get to a certain place where you're like, wow, we've made a bunch of progress, like we might be pretty close to being done, and then you start thinking about what else you have to get done, and you're like, no, we're gonna be here for years. And that reminded me of a podcast episode I did a while back where I interviewed Rob Davio, who is one of the best game designers on the planet, and he was talking about when he and Matt Leacock, another phenomenal designer, were working on a game called Pandemic Legacy, and they were feeling really good. They made a ton of progress, and he was looking at everything, kind of thinking through, okay, what have we gotten done so far? And he was talking to Matt, and he said, hey, I think we're like 80% done. And then Matt looked at him and was like, oh, cool. That means we've only got like 80% left to go. And Rob laughed at the time, but then after several more months went by, he was like, yeah, we really did have about 80% left to finish. And this is what I call Leacock's Law. When you're 80% done, you've got about 80% left to go. And I called Matt up the other day and I asked him his perspective and just his thoughts on that particular scenario, and this is what he had to say.
The Pandemic Legacy games took a long time to complete. I mean, I think the first one took like 14 months and the last one took over 2 years. And so it's a real marathon. And we worked together for a very long time on it. And I think part of the success in like getting this stuff done was just there's a certain amount of self-deception involved. You had to always kind of pretend that you're almost done. And one of the common things that I would say with him is that, we're almost 80% done. And then when we're done with that, then we'll just have the other 80% to go. And that's totally what it feels like, because you kind of break down the project into different stages. And so there's cracking the initial nut of like finding out what the core design is. And that just feels like a Herculean task, like figuring out that. And then there's all the development that comes after that. And that's just another big project. And so they all feel like the big ball of work. But when you get one done, you're like, okay, we got that big chunk done. Now we just have the other chunk to do.
And what I find so interesting about that situation is that you had 2 of the best game designers on the planet, and they were working on a project that actually had a pretty good head start because they weren't starting from scratch. I mean, they were starting with Pandemic and then building on top of that, and it had already been proven to be a really good game and to sell a lot of copies. And even those guys in that scenario still struggled to get things done. They still looked at all the progress that they had made and then were like, yeah, but we've got a lot left. And that gives me some hope, and maybe gives you some hope as well, that it's not just something unique to people starting out. It's not unique to designers of, kind of a lower status than the greatest of all time. Like, if it's happening to them, of course it's going to happen to me and the rest of us. But that's good to know that it's not just me. I'm not the only one struggling through. I'm not the only one who's having a hard time getting things done. Leacock's Law creates a completely level playing field, and it affects everybody, no matter who you are or what you're working on. And so I asked Matt if he had any advice that he could share with us on how to finish things, anything that works for him, and this is what he said.
I think, breaking things down into smaller pieces just really helps in general. It helps you get started. It makes the overall project less daunting. I also try not to look at everything in its entirety. I don't like listing out every single task that I'm going to have to do until the end. I just like concentrating on the next things. I know I have to block it out, and there's going to be a lot, and it's going to be a marathon, but just trying to focus on what I need to do now, it helps me not get too overwhelmed with everything. So that would be one piece of advice, is like just try to chunk it into smaller pieces. And sometimes another good rule is just start anywhere to some extent. If you don't do anything, that's bad, right? So even just starting on something that you're going to need to do in the future even can be a good way just to get motivated and get moving. But the other thing that's motivating is just knowing that it's important to remember that all the fit and finish at the end is really important. That you're only going to be able to release a game one time, and so that's a good motivator as well. Trying to pretend that the game's been released sometimes helps because I'm like, oh wow, there's a glaring problem here. I should go address that because I don't want that to actually ship. That can be a big motivator too to getting that final polish done. Kind of pretending like, oh, my prototype as it is already shipped, and oh crap, I found a problem. Makes me think, oh, I'm gonna have a lot of regret if I don't go and do those last pieces of fit and polish.
So like Matt said, number one, break things down into smaller and smaller chunks. When I'm thinking about writing a book, I get overwhelmed if I'm thinking about the entire book, the entire process, and so I'll break it down into smaller and smaller bites. And maybe it's a chapter, but a lot of times it's just a section. It's just a handful of paragraphs. It's like, okay, let me just focus on that because it's a lot less daunting. If I'm working on a game, I don't think about the game. I think about a mechanism. I think about, let's just work on the combat system. Let's just worry about the movement system or how these cards are going to combo together. Let me do that and not feel overwhelmed, because a lot of times when you start thinking about how much you have to do, like this big, massive list of things, a lot of times you're just like, I'll just not do any of it because it's too much. And so the answer to that is make it smaller. And that leads right into the second thing of focus on whatever is next. Again, don't think about the big, global picture of what's involved. Just think about what's the next thing to do. Play the next play, as my old football coach used to say. Just think about what's in front of you and work on that, because again, it's less overwhelming, and you just keep taking steps forward and you keep inching your way forward day after day after day. And then a month goes by, a couple months, 3, 4, 5 months go by, and you turn around and you're like, wow, everything's different. But if you're thinking about the 3 or 4 month process of in general, a lot of times it's hard to get off the couch. And so just one step at a time, think about what's next. And something that's really helped me recently is thinking about it more in terms of making the goal the action, not the outcome. I'm not thinking, okay, I've got this big goal to complete a book, complete a game, complete a YouTube video. I'm just thinking about the goal is the action. The goal is to hit record on my camera. The goal is to run a playtest. The goal is to write a section, not the goal is to write a book. And so it's making the goal the action involved that eventually will lead to the outcome that I want. But I'm not thinking in those big, broad terms. I'm just thinking action right now. Let's do it. Next thing up. That leads right into Matt's number 3, which is start anywhere. Because sometimes the next thing on the list is a bit overwhelming by itself. And so, hey, let's just start over here at this smaller task, this little bit easier thing to get done, and let's work on that, because what that does is it builds momentum, and then you get rolling, and then you get in a groove, you get in some rhythm, and then all of a sudden that thing that you put off, it doesn't seem so bad. It's not quite as big because now you're warmed up, now you're loose, now you're ready to go, and then you can start tackling those bigger things. And so sometimes just start anywhere. Just start anything that you feel like you can get done right now in this moment. Go there first.
Let's do it.
And then number 4, think about the project in terms of what you're going to regret. I mentioned this in a recent video where I talked about the region beta paradox and how if you can just get your brain into that space where you're almost like time traveling in your own head and you're projecting out and then looking back and thinking, oh, I wish I would have done things differently. I wish I would have done this or that. If you can kind of get your head into that mode and feel that negative emotion that kind of comes with that, hopefully the burden of that will inspire you, give you some energy, give you some momentum to get some things done. Unfortunately, it's just how our silly caveman brains work, that we're often more motivated by negative emotion than positive emotion. And so if you can just think in those terms of like, well, I need to get this done because like, what if the game came out today, or the book or the video, and then people engaged with it, they would feel like, hey, there's some things missing. This isn't as good of an experience as I had hoped, or whatever, and just use that negative feeling to help you get things done. Leacock's Law is just a fact of life. It's something that I ran into recently when I was working on a Robomon expansion, and I got to a place back, I think it was like December, where I was like, man, I'm like 80% done, and I felt really good. And I was telling people, hey, the game's gonna be coming out soon and can't wait to get it to you. And then I started realizing how much I actually had left to do, and it was like, oh yeah, there's that other 80% I have to get done, and it ended up taking quite a few more months to complete everything. And that was with working on it basically every single day. And what you realize is that the first 80% takes a certain amount of time, and then the next 20% to get it all the way, over 100, it takes about the same amount of time, and it just is what it is, and usually takes about the same amount of effort and energy and all that. And so, you know, it happens to us all. But the truth is, most people never even get off the couch. They never even get started.
The couch is a happy place.
And then the people that do start, most of those, they never finish anything. And so if you can just find a way to get some things done, even if it's not that great, even if it's not perfect, if it's not some kind of best-selling hit of a thing, that's okay, because you've finished, and that puts you in like the top 1% of people in general, because most folks can't be bothered to start or finish. And so if you can just keep going, I just want to encourage you to keep moving forward. And I saw a video recently from a guy named Alex Hormozy, and I got a lot out of it, and so I thought you might too. And so here's my favorite clip.
I'm actually very against the whole confidence mantra of like people being like, you gotta believe in yourself, you gotta you have to do things so that you have evidence that you can support why you are good. I think it gives a lot of spiritual strength. That, because I got asked on an interview, they're like, how are you so certain? I was like, you talk about these things like with so much certainty. I was like, well, that's just how I've done it. Like, and it's that depth of experience and knowledge that like no one can question that we built those things. That's truth. Those are the real numbers. And so as long as you're not fudging your numbers, right? And you just say like, this is what it is, then of course you're certain, right? Because I think confidence is self-delusion. It's trying to make up for what you don't have evidence for. And I think it's a much easier practice to stop pretending and start doing the stuff that you should be certain about.
I just love that concept. My confidence is based on evidence. It's not just based on feelings or emotions or anything like that. It's based on what I've done in the past that I can look at and say, hey, I am this kind of person because here's what I've done. Here's what I have accomplished. I finished things then, so I know I can finish things now, and to have that confidence. And it's such a good way to look at it. And it reminded me of Morpheus from the Matrix movies, who put it like this.
I stand here without fear because I remember. I remember that I am here not because of the path that lies before me, but because of the path that lies behind me.
I'm not confident because of the path in front of me. I'm confident because of the path behind me. And so if you can just find a way to finish anything, just finish something, right? Doesn't have to be great, doesn't have to be amazing, but what it will do is give you the evidence that you need to build that confidence to realize, oh, I'm the kind of person that finishes things. How do I know? Because I've finished things. And then you get that momentum. And so one project leads to the next, and it does get a little bit easier as you go. Maybe not in the sense of like, you're never going to get over Leacock's law. Like anytime you have 80% done, you're still going to have 80% left to go, no matter who you are, what you're working on. But the confidence that you build up over time after projects build up and after you complete things and you get things across the finish line, that is the difference. That if you can just find a way to keep going, you become the person, you become the kind of person that finishes things. And how do you know? Because you've already done it. So that's my challenge and encouragement for you today, is just keep going. You have it in you to get things done. You have it in you to finish. And once you do that, once you prove it to yourself, or prove it again, maybe it's been a while, but you prove it again, then you'll keep going, and then you can prove it to yourself over and over again, and you build up just this big stack of evidence that this is the kind of person that you are, and then you can carry that confidence into the next project and the next and the next, and then finish more as you go. But what are your strategies for getting things done? I'd love to see your advice in the comments. And if you ever struggle with imposter syndrome, or just feeling like you're not good enough, or just fighting a lot of self-doubt, make sure you check out this video. I had a ton of fun making it, and I think you'll enjoy it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.